Before I met the Penrites, I never thought much about revenge. Growing up, I believed in letting go, forgiving, moving on. Holding grudges was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die, my mother always said. But the Penrites, they had a philosophy entirely their own. Eleanor Green is my name. Well, Eleanor Penrite now, and I'm going to tell you how I discovered the family I married into has been orchestrating calculated acts of revenge for over a century. Not the dramatic, bloody kind you see in movies. No, the Penrites specialized in something far more insidious. Patient, meticulous revenge that unfolded so gradually the victims never even knew they were targets. During my final year at university, I met James Penrite. I was studying architecture, spending most of my days in the design studio, when he walked in to give a guest lecture on historical preservation. Tall with warm hazel eyes and an earnest smile that made his whole face light up. My attention was captured by James immediately. He spoke with such passion about his family's architectural firm, detailing their commitment to preserving historical buildings across New England. I worked up the courage after the lecture to ask him about internship opportunities. His card was given to me, our fingers brushing as he handed it over. The Penrite Group is always looking for fresh talent, he said, especially those who understand that buildings hold memories. That phrase stayed with me. Buildings hold memories. Just how literal the Penrites took that concept, I would later realize. Sitting in the Penrite Group's main office 2 weeks later, I found myself in a beautifully restored Victorian in Boston's Back Bay neighborhood. A perfect blend of historical details and modern functionality was the interior. Architectural drawings and family photographs spanning generations covered walls framed by original crown moldings. After returning from World War II, James' grandfather, Walter Penrite, founded the firm in 1947. Before him was Edgar Penrite, a master carpenter in the early 1900s. Stretching back over a century was the Penrite lineage of builders, architects, and craftsmen. After graduation, my internship quickly turned into a full-time job offer, and something more personal evolved from my professional relationship with James. A walking tour of Boston's hidden architectural gems was our first date. James pointed out details most people would miss. A particular type of brick pattern, an unusual window frame, a doorway with symbols subtly worked into the design. My family believes buildings should tell stories. He told me, his hand warm in mine as we walked through the crisp autumn air. Not just about their owners, but about the craftsmen who built them, the history they've witnessed. With James's mind, I fell in love first, his encyclopedic knowledge of architectural history, his attention to detail, his reverence for craftsmanship. The rest of me followed quickly enough. On the rooftop garden of a building his firm had recently restored, he proposed 8 months later. The ring he offered had belonged to his grandmother, a delicate arrangement of sapphires and diamonds that looked both antique and timeless. The Penrites have always believed in preserving the past, he said as he slipped it onto my finger. And building a future. Without hesitation, I said yes. What I'd really agreed to, I began to understand only after the wedding. About an hour outside Boston, the Penrite family estate, Thornfield, sat on 5 acres of land. A sprawling Queen Anne-style mansion built in 1897 was the main house, with multiple additions that somehow managed to maintain the architectural integrity of the original structure. James had mentioned we'd be living there after the honeymoon, but I'd assumed he meant in one of the guest cottages on the property, not in the main house with his entire family. It's tradition, he explained as we drove up the long tree-lined driveway. Penrites stay together. Always have. White on the steering wheel, I noticed his knuckles were. His usual easy manner was replaced by something tense and formal, but I was too distracted by the house to give it much thought. Magnificent was Thornfield. 3 stories of red brick and dark wood trim with a corner tower and wraparound porch. The walls were climbed by ivy, framing windows that gleamed in the late afternoon sun. At the front door, Jane's parents, Richard and Sylvia Penrite, greeted us. An older version of James was Richard. Same height, same hazel eyes, though his were cooler, more assessing. Petite and elegant was Sylvia, her silver hair cut in a sleek bob that emphasized her sharp cheekbones. With polite smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes, they welcomed me. "Eleanor," Richard said, taking my hand between both of his. Firm, almost painful, was his grip. "Welcome to the family. For you both, we've prepared the East Wing," Sylvia added. "For newlyweds to have their own space within Thornfield, it's tradition." That evening, I learned that the East Wing wasn't just a bedroom, but an entire section of the house, complete with a sitting room, office, and private bathroom. Into sections for each branch of the family, the Penrite home was divided. The central portion was occupied by Jane's parents. In the West Wing lived his Uncle Edward and Aunt Marianne with their daughter Cecilia, who was about my age. In the South Wing lived his grandfather, Walter, now 94, with a full-time nurse. "What about the North Wing?" I asked during dinner, noticing that no one had mentioned it. Over the table, a silence fell. His throat was cleared by James. "Mainly storage now, it's family archives, old furniture, that sort of thing. We don't use it much," Richard added, his tone indicating the subject was closed. That night, as James and I settled into our new quarters, I couldn't help but feel like I'd stepped into a Gothic novel. Beautifully appointed was the East Wing. Freshly painted walls, polished hardwood floors, furniture that looked both antique and comfortable. But something was off about the space. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on. "Do you feel it?" James asked as we lay in bed, the moonlight casting shadows across our room. "Feel what?" For a moment, he was quiet. "The house. It has a presence." Nervously, I laughed. "You mean it's haunted?" "Not exactly." He turned to face me, his expression serious in the dim light. "By my great-great-grandfather, Edwin Penrite, Thornfield was built. He believed buildings absorb the emotions of the people who live in them, that the very walls can hold memories. Like you said in your lecture, buildings hold memories." James nodded. "More than just a saying to us, it's a fundamental belief it is, and it's why we've always been so focused on preservation." He hesitated. "A lot about my family you don't know yet, Eleanor. But you will. From each other, we don't keep secrets. That's another Penrite tradition." For details, I should have pressed him then. But I was tired from the travel. And heavy on my shoulders was already the weight of joining a new family with all its traditions and expectations. So I simply kissed him and drifted off to sleep, telling myself I had plenty of time to learn the Penrite ways. In a blur of adjustment, the first month at Thornfield passed. At the Penrite Group's Boston office, I continued working, commuting with James each day. For formal family dinners that felt more like business meetings, we returned to the estate at night. Ongoing projects were discussed by the Penrites, architectural techniques were debated, and occasionally family history was reminisced about. To me, they were unfailingly polite, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider, except with Walter, James's grandfather. Immediately, the elderly man took a liking to me, insisting I visit him in the South Wing whenever I had time. With books, architectural models, and strange artifacts collected over a lifetime, his rooms were filled. "You have good eyes," he told me during one of our first conversations. "You see details others miss." "That's why I became an architect," I replied. Smiling, Walter saw the wrinkles around his eyes deepen. "No, child. Because you understand that buildings are more than just structures, you became an architect." "Vessels, there." "Vessels for what?" "Intent," he said simply. "Every building has a purpose beyond the obvious. That has always been understood by the Penrites." During my third month at Thornfield, I first ventured into the North Wing. On a business trip to Chicago, James was away, overseeing the restoration of a historic theater. From home, I'd been working that day, finishing designs for a new project when a power outage hit the East Wing. In Boston was Richard, and attending a charity luncheon was Sylvia. The circuit breaker for our section was located in the North Wing, the housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, informed me. "I can reset it for you, Mrs. Penrite," she offered, her tone nervous. No need, I said. Just point me to the right panel and I'll handle it. Mrs. Winters hesitated, then gave me detailed directions, adding, please don't wander. The north wing it's not maintained like the rest of the house. At the end of the main corridor, the entrance to the north wing was a heavy oak door, locked with an old-fashioned key that hung on a hook nearby. As I pushed it open, the door creaked, revealing a dimly lit hallway. Different here was the air, cooler, with a faint metallic scent that reminded me of old pennies. Unlike the rest of Thornfield, the north wing showed its age. In corners, wallpaper peeled, and in the thin shafts of light coming through partially covered windows, dust motes danced. But even in its neglected state, I could see the craftsmanship in the woodwork, the careful attention to detail that marked all Penrite constructions. Easily enough, I found the electrical panel and reset the trip breaker. But as I turned to leave, my attention was caught by a half-open door. What appeared to be a library was beyond it, shelves of leather-bound books lining the walls. Forward, curiosity pulled me. Large was the room with a massive desk at its center and reading chairs positioned near a cold fireplace. Well-maintained seemed this room, unlike the hallway. No dust, no signs of neglect. Regularly, someone came here. What drew me to the desk, I can't say. Perhaps it was the architect in me admiring the quality of the woodwork, or perhaps something deeper. An instinct I didn't yet understand. Multiple drawers had the desk, all locked except one. A leather-bound journal was inside. Its cover was worn with age. I shouldn't have opened it. I knew that even as my fingers traced the embossed initials on the cover. E.P. Edwin Penrite, the builder of Thornfield, James's great-great-grandfather. Yellowed but well-preserved were the journal's pages. Neat and methodical was the handwriting, each entry dated and detailed. I flipped to a random page dated June 17, 1898. Asterisk construction completed on the Henderson residence today. As instructed by client, included the modifications to the western wall. Estimated timeline for structural compromise, 15 to 20 years. Payment received in full. Note, Henderson failed to credit my designs for the Burlington project last year. Patience will deliver what confrontation cannot. Asterisk. Frowning, I reread the entry. It sounded like Edwin had deliberately built a flaw into someone's home. A flaw designed to cause problems years later. But that couldn't be right. Known for their impeccable craftsmanship were the Penrites. Their buildings standing the test of time. I flipped to another entry. This one from 1901. Asterisk completed interior work on Caldwell's office building. Installed the special ventilation system as designed. Effects should begin within 6 to 8 months. Subtle at first, increasing gradually. Caldwell will never connect his symptoms to the building. A fitting response to his theft of my land investment opportunity. Asterisk. My heart began to race. These entries weren't just odd. They were disturbing. They suggested deliberate sabotage calculated to harm people who had wronged Edwin Penrite in some way. And not immediate harm, but slow, insidious damage that would take years to manifest. So absorbed in the journal was I that I didn't hear the footsteps until they were right outside the door. Quickly, I returned the book to its drawer and moved to one of the bookshelves, pretending to browse the titles. Into the room wheeled Walter Penrite, his nurse following behind him. He didn't seem surprised to see me. "Ah, Eleanor, the family library, I see you found." His voice was casual, but his eyes were sharp, assessing. "The power went out in the east wing," I explained. "I came to reset the breaker and got curious about this room." With a wave, Walter nodded, dismissing his nurse. When we were alone, he wheeled closer to me. "What did you think of Edwin's journal?" I froze. There was no point denying it. Clearly, Walter had seen me replace the book. "I only read a couple of entries," I admitted. "Confusing, they were." "Not confusing," Walter corrected. "Just honest." Precisely recording his work Edwin believed in. To the desk, he moved, opened the drawer, and retrieved the journal. The power of architecture has always been understood by the Penrites, Eleanor. Not just to shelter and impress, but to influence, to correct. Sounding like he was deliberately harming people, those entries made it. Thin was Walter's smile. Such a blunt word is harming. Balancing the scales, Edwin preferred. People who wronged him experienced consequences, yes, but proportional ones. A man who stole credit for Edwin's work found his own home becoming gradually uninhabitable. A business rival who sabotaged a contract developed mysterious health issues while working in his new office. He tapped the journal. An artist of justice was Edwin. Despite the summer heat, I felt cold. And after Edwin, did this art continue? The methods evolved. Its own approach has each generation of Penrites. Steady was Walter's gaze. Electrical systems, Richard prefers. Subtle manipulations that cause inconvenience rather than harm. For acoustics, your James has a gift. Did you know certain sound frequencies can induce anxiety, even paranoia when experienced over time? Like a physical blow, the implications hit me. The Penrite Group's restoration projects, their custom homes, their historical preservation work, were they all vehicles for this twisted form of revenge? Why are you telling me this? I managed to ask. Because you're a Penrite now, and from family, Penrites don't keep secrets, Walter wheeled back slightly. Besides, James said you had the right temperament, that you understood nuance. Of James, I thought, my husband, the man I loved. Had he been assessing me all along, looking for signs that I could accept this family legacy? I need to think, I said, moving toward the door. Walter nodded. Of course. Take your time. But remember, Eleanor, you've already participated. That historical society renovation you've been working on for the past month, the one where you suggested those innovative ventilation adjustments. In about 2 years, Mr. Barrett will find his precious archives developing mold issues. Gradual, untraceable mold that will destroy his collection piece by piece. Just as he destroyed James' reputation with the Historical Commission last year. In a daze, I left the North Wing, Walter's words echoing in my mind. He was right. Those ventilation adjustments I had designed. Thinking I was creating an energy-efficient system. My innovation, James had praised, suggested minor tweaks. Unwittingly, had I become part of the Penrite revenge machine? That night, I couldn't sleep. Awake, I lay staring at the ceiling, re-examining every project I'd worked on since joining the firm. How many of my designs had been subtly modified for vengeful purposes? How many clients were unknowingly living or working in buildings designed to punish them? When James returned from Chicago the following evening, I was waiting in our sitting room. Heavy between us were Walter's revelations, though I hadn't yet spoken them aloud. You've been to the North Wing, he said immediately, setting down his suitcase. It wasn't a question. Edwin's journal, your grandfather showed me. I watched his face carefully. About the family business, the real one, he told me. Sighing, James ran a hand through his hair. I wanted to tell you myself after you'd had more time to adjust to the family. Adjust to what exactly? My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. The fact that my husband's family has been engaging in elaborate architectural revenge for over a century? That my own designs might have been used to hurt people. Not hurt, James corrected quickly, echoing Walter. Balance. And not random people. Only those who truly deserve it. Who decides that? Who appointed the Penrite's judge, jury, and executioner? Across from me, James sat down. His expression was earnest. Vigilantes, we're not. Craftsmen, we are. For those who abuse power, who harm others and escape conventional justice, we build consequences into our work. He leaned forward. Think about Barrett at the Historical Society. He deliberately sabotaged my preservation proposal because I wouldn't hire his nephew's construction company, a company with multiple safety violations. His actions cost the community a chance to save a historic landmark. So, by destroying the archives he cares about, you're punishing him, I said flatly. teaching him that actions have consequences. We are to irreplaceable documents, the mold won't spread. Only the replaceable storage materials, we've designed it to target. A massive inconvenience and expense he'll have, just as he caused for us and the community. Struggling to reconcile the man I loved with these revelations, I shook my head. Why not just report his nepotism to the board? We did. They did nothing. That's often how it goes. The conventional channels fail and the powerful remain unaccountable. Before me, James moved to kneel, taking my hands in his. In that gap, the Penrites have always existed, Eleanor. Where official justice fails, we ensure balance is still maintained. Away, I pulled my hands. And you never thought to mention this before I married into the family, before I became complicit? Would you have believed me, or would you have thought I was disturbed? His eyes searched mine. I wanted you to see the family first, to understand our commitment to craft and legacy. The rest, it needed context. Context, I repeated. For systematic revenge plots carried out through building design. Innocent, we never target, James insisted. And disproportionate to the offense, we never cause harm. The Penrite Code, that's. Needing distance, I stood up. Time to process this, I need, James. I can't just accept that my life's work might be used as a weapon. He nodded, his expression pained but understanding. Take all the time you need, but please don't make any decisions until you've heard the full history. More to this than Walter told you, there is. That night, in one of the guest rooms, I slept. The next morning, I called in sick to the office and spent the day walking the grounds of Thornfield, trying to sort through my thoughts. Beautiful was the estate, the gardens meticulously maintained, ancient trees providing shade from the summer sun. Hard to reconcile was this peaceful place with the calculated vengeance that apparently financed it. By evening, I'd made a decision. I would hear James out, learn the full history he mentioned. Not because I was ready to accept this family legacy, but because I needed to understand the extent of what I'd married into before deciding whether to stay or go. In his study, I found James, reviewing blueprints. When I entered, he looked up, hope and weariness battling in his expression. I want to know everything, I said without preamble. The full history, as you put it. Relief washed over his features. Thank you. But not here. To the north wing we need to go, to the archive room. Beyond the library I discovered, the archive room turned out to be accessible through a hidden door behind one of the bookshelves. Some mechanism was activated by James and the shelf swung outward, revealing a temperature-controlled room filled with filing cabinets, display cases, and a large central table. Waiting for us were Richard and Walter, along with James's uncle Edward. Noticeably absent were Sylvia and Mary Ann. The women in the family are given the choice, Richard explained when I asked. They can know everything and participate, know everything and abstain, or know only what's necessary for plausible deniability. The third option, Sylvia chose. Mary Ann too. And what about Cecilia? I asked, thinking of James's quiet cousin. Fully involved, she is, Edward said. Has been since college. For landscape architecture, quite a talent she has. Did you know certain plants can affect soil pH over time? For properties with extensive gardens, very useful. Sick, I felt, but forced myself to focus. You said there was more to the history than what Walter told me. James nodded, moving to one of the display cases. Inside was an old photograph in a silver frame. A family portrait from what looked like the 1890s. A stern-faced man I assumed was Edwin Penrite stood behind a seated woman with 3 children arranged around them. Where it began, this is, James said. With Edwin and his family, but not in the way you might think. The narrative was taken over by Richard. In 1892, a respected architect in Boston was Edwin Penrite, known for his innovative designs and attention to detail. A thriving practice he had, a loving family, and a reputation for absolute integrity. To the photograph, he gestured. That summer, hired was Edwin to design a new city hall for a growing industrial town north of Boston. Substantial was the commission, and into the project Edwin poured himself. Closer, Walter wheeled, his voice soft but clear. The town's mayor and several council members had connections to a rival architectural firm. Edwin's designs they used, but claimed they were unsatisfactory. They refused to pay him and hired their connected firm to fix the plans, which meant making minor cosmetic changes to Edwin's original design. Ruined was Edwin, not just financially, but professionally. The council members spread rumors that his work was substandard, that he'd tried to cut corners. No one would hire him. Everything the family lost, their home, their savings. Pneumonia that winter contracted Edwin's wife, Margaret, living in their reduced circumstances. Before spring, she died. At the woman in the photograph, I looked, her face solemn but kind. Terrible, but it doesn't justify. Finished, we're not, Richard interrupted. A state senator went on to become the mayor who orchestrated Edwin's downfall. A federal judge became one of the council members. For their actions, they faced no consequences. In fact, they prospered. Meanwhile, as a common laborer on construction sites, Edwin was forced to work. From school, his children were pulled to work in factories. On the arms of his wheelchair, Walter's gnarled hands tightened. One of those children was my father. 12 he was when his mother died, when he had to abandon his education to work 14-hour days in a textile mill. Before continuing, James placed a hand on his grandfather's shoulder. 2 years after Margaret's death, hired was Edwin as a carpenter on a new mansion being built for the former mayor, now Senator Williams. Ironic it was. The man who had stolen Edwin's designs and destroyed his career now needed his skills, though he didn't recognize the broken architect in the weathered laborer. Edwin sabotaged the construction, let me guess, I said. Not immediately, Richard replied. First, he observed. He noticed that Williams was having an affair with his secretary, that he was embezzling campaign funds, that he abused his staff. Realized Edwin that men like Williams never faced consequences through conventional means. Their connections and money protected them. The story was taken up by Walter again. On that mansion for 8 months, Edwin worked, and during that time, subtle flaws into the structure he designed. Nothing that would cause immediate harm, but imperfections that would manifest over years. Windows that would let in drafts no matter how well sealed. Floors that would creak and shift no matter how often repaired. Pipes that would develop slow leaks in hard-to-reach places. About revenge it wasn't. Not really, James said, his voice gentle. About justice it was, about ensuring that a man who thought himself above consequences would face them in ways he couldn't escape or buy his way out of. Edward, who had been silent until now, added, something important discovered Edwin during that project, that architecture could be a vehicle for delayed consequences, that buildings could deliver justice when courts and society failed to. To another display case, Richard moved, this one containing what looked like architectural drawings. After the Williams mansion, slowly rebuilt his life did Edwin. Under assumed names he worked at first, his true identity hidden, but his practice of building consequences into his designs he continued, only for those who had committed serious wrongs and escaped conventional justice. Meticulous records he kept, Walter said, gesturing to several leather-bound journals similar to the one I'd found. Every case documented, every offense noted, every consequence designed to fit the crime. Capricious or cruel, he was not. Methodical, judicial, he was. To the central table, James guided me where a family tree was displayed under glass. As Edwin's sons grew older, his methods he taught them, not just architectural techniques, but his philosophy of balanced consequences. And when they showed the right temperament and judgment, his secret craft as well he taught them. And so it continued, Richard said, generation after generation. Slowly restored was the Rite name in the architectural community, though the prominence Edwin once enjoyed, the family never again reached, but by design that was. More quietly we learned to operate, to build our reputation for quality and preservation while maintaining our true purpose. Which is what exactly? I asked. Through building design, vigilante justice. specialized consequences for specialized situations, we prefer to think of it as, Edward replied. Everyone who does wrong, the Penrites don't target, only those who abuse power and privilege to harm others and escape conventional accountability. To another display case, Walter wheeled over, this one containing newspaper clippings. In 1943, a factory owner named Harrison deliberately ignored safety regulations, resulting in a fire that killed 17 workers. He bribed officials to clear him of wrongdoing. He tapped the glass above a yellowed clipping. 2 years later, Harrison's new office building was designed by my father. Subtly distributed cotton dust did the ventilation system. Not enough to cause immediate problems, but enough that the same chronic lung disease his workers suffered from, Harrison developed. For 30 years, he lived with that consequence. In the 1970s, Richard added, a historic black neighborhood was bulldozed by a developer to build luxury condominiums, leaving 60 families homeless. Due to legal technicalities, the courts ruled in his favor. When he hired the Penrite Group to design his vacation home in 1978, I ensured that subtle structural issues would render it uninhabitable within a decade, just as he had done to those families. My hand, James squeezed. New techniques, new understanding to the work has each generation of Penrites brought. What Edwin began with crude structural modifications, we've refined into something more precise. Today, consequences that affect only the specific individual who deserves them we can design, without collateral damage. Away, I pulled my hand, my mind reeling. And you all believe this is justified, that you have the right to appoint yourselves judges. People to punish, we don't seek out, James said earnestly. We simply ensure that those who come to us with blood on their hands don't escape the consequences of their actions. Who are you exactly to make these judgments? I challenged. What makes the Penrites qualified to decide who deserves punishment and what form it should take? In a smile that held no humor, Walter's aged face creased. Special, we're not, Eleanor. We're just one family that refused to accept that might makes right, that the powerful can harm the vulnerable without consequence. The skills we have we use to restore balance where we can, and careful we are, Edward added. Thoroughly, every case is researched. Before any action is taken, multiple family members must agree. Documentation, evidence we require. Than most courts, more rigorous we are. Around the table, I walked, trying to process everything I was hearing. Clearly believed in their cause, the Penrites saw themselves as agents of justice rather than revenge. And I couldn't deny the examples they cited involved genuine wrongdoing that had gone unpunished. But still, what about the law? I asked. What you're doing? It's illegal. Property damage at minimum, it's much of what our targets do, so is, Richard replied calmly. The difference is they break laws and harm people for profit or power. Consequences only to balance scales that should have been balanced by legitimate means, we design. Cautiously, James approached me. Overwhelming, I know this is, and I know I should have found a way to explain it before we married, but afraid I was. Afraid of losing you. Afraid you wouldn't understand. Understand what? I said. That my husband is part of a multi-generational conspiracy to exact revenge through building design. The absurdity of it struck me suddenly, and I laughed despite myself. Insane it sounds when I say it aloud. Not revenge, James corrected gently. Justice. A difference there is. Around the archive room, I looked at the carefully preserved records of a century of Penrite justice. At the solemn faces of the men watching me, men who truly believed in what they were doing. Time I need, I said finally. Real time and space. This is too much to process all at once, it's. Of course, Richard nodded. Whatever time you need, take, but I hope you'll consider what we've shared carefully. About consequences only, the Penrite legacy isn't. About standing against the abuse of power when all other remedies have failed, it's. In silence, James walked me back to the East Wing. At the door to our quarters, he finally spoke. I love you, Eleanor. That has never been part of any plan or calculation. Whatever you decide about the family legacy, separate and real are my feelings for you." I believed him. Despite everything, I believed that James loved me. But I wasn't sure that was enough anymore. The longest of my life was the following week. From work, I took a leave of absence, claiming a family emergency, which wasn't entirely untrue. Into one of the guest rooms, James moved, giving me space while remaining available if I wanted to talk. A polite distance was maintained by the rest of the family, though I occasionally caught Walter watching me with those keen eyes that seemed to see too much. In Thornfield's gardens, I spent hours, walking the grounds, and trying to sort through my conflicted feelings. Monsters weren't the Penrites. At least that way, they didn't see themselves. A strict code they had, targeted only those they believed truly deserved consequences, and designed those consequences to fit the original offense. In many ways, more measured than the justice system itself they were. But judges and executioners, they were still appointing themselves, still making unilateral decisions about who deserved punishment and what form it should take. No matter how they justified it, that fundamental arrogance troubled me deeply. On the 7th day of my self-imposed isolation, drawn back to the north wing, I found myself. As I used the key from its hook and entered the now familiar corridor, no one tried to stop me. This time, I bypassed the library and went straight to the hidden archive room, which James had shown me how to access. Inside, I began methodically examining the records. With Edwin's original journals, starting and working forward through the decades, I wanted to understand the full scope of the Penrite legacy to see for myself whether their claims of careful targeting and proportional consequences held true. What I found was both better and worse than I'd feared. Indeed, selective were the Penrites. For those who had committed serious wrongs and escaped conventional accountability, their justice was reserved. To reflect the original harm, the consequences they designed were calculated. A slumlord who let tenants freeze would find his own home impossible to heat properly. A CEO whose factory polluted a river would discover his vacation home developing mysterious water issues. But there were also cases that made me deeply uncomfortable. Instances where the family's judgment seemed more personal than principled. A critic who had savaged Richard's early work found his newly renovated office developing acoustic problems that made concentration difficult. A rival firm that had poached Penrite clients experienced mysterious issues with multiple projects. As I reached the more recent records, those involving James and his generation, a shift in methodology I noticed. More sophisticated had become the consequences, more targeted, less about physical discomfort or property damage, more about creating specific psychological effects, anxiety triggered by certain sound frequencies, subtle lighting that disrupted sleep patterns, airflow designed to induce mild respiratory reactions. In one of the last files, I found something that made my blood run cold: detailed plans for the Historical Society renovation I'd been working on. Subtly modified had been my original designs, not just to create the mold issue Walter had mentioned, but to incorporate sound patterns that would induce anxiety in Barrett, specifically calibrated to his typical working hours and the location of his office. At these plans, I was still staring when the door opened and James entered. He didn't seem surprised to find me there. "I thought you might come back to do your own research," he said, closing the door behind him. What I would have done, it's the modified plans, I held up. "Without telling me, you changed my designs." Yes, he had the grace to look ashamed. That, I shouldn't have done. Or just let me be an unwitting accomplice. Were you ever going to tell me? Working up to it I was, James admitted. The waters with theoretical discussions about justice and consequences, testing. Before the project was completed, I knew I needed to tell you, but I was a coward. Afraid of losing you, I was. So without my knowledge or consent, instead, you made me complicit. I set the plans down carefully, controlling my anger. A partner, that's not how someone treats. A tool, that's how someone treats. He flinched. Right, you are. Wrong, I was. All I can say is that the Penrite legacy, it becomes part of you. The secrecy, the careful calculations, second nature they become. Closer he moved, though still keeping his distance. But as a tool, I never saw you, Eleanor. Never. As someone who might understand, who might eventually share in this work willingly, I saw you. And if I don't, I said. If I decide I can't be part of this. For a long moment, James was quiet. Then, your decision we'll respect. Asked to participate, you won't be, and without your knowledge again, we'll ensure your work is never used. Chosen not to participate before, the Penrites have had family members, like Marianne. Anyone, we don't force. And what about our marriage? Entirely separate, that's, he said quickly. At least for me it is. I love you, Eleanor. Whether you embrace the family legacy or not, that hasn't changed. His face, I studied, looking for signs of deception. But fear and hope battling in his eyes was all I saw. He truly did love me. And despite everything, I still loved him. But the only factor in this equation, love wasn't. I need to ask you something, I said. And the absolute truth, I need. Anything. As a result of Penrite justice, has anyone ever been seriously injured or killed? Firmly, James shook his head. No, never. A line we've never crossed, that's. Discomfort, inconvenience, even financial hardship in some cases, the consequences we design are meant to create, but beyond minor symptoms like those the targets themselves caused others, never physical harm. And have you ever targeted someone who didn't deserve it, someone innocent, or someone whose offense was minor? He hesitated. Somewhat across generations has varied the definition of deserving. Harsher in their judgments were Edwin and his sons than we are today. And yes, there have been cases, like the critic who attacked Richard's work, that seem more about wounded pride than true justice. Through his hair, James ran a hand. Perfect, we're not. With human flaws, human we are, but to the principles Edwin established, we try to hold ourselves. Target only those who have caused serious harm and escaped conventional justice. Design consequences proportional to the original offense. Avoid collateral damage to innocence. I nodded, absorbing his words. One last question. If I asked you to stop, to walk away from this legacy completely, would you? The question clearly caught him off guard. Opened his mouth James, then closed it again, genuinely considering his answer. I don't know, he finally said. Without hesitation, I'd like to say yes. But this work, since I was old enough to understand it, part of my identity it's been. In what we do, I believe, in the balance we maintain. Directly, he met my gaze. Back, I think I could design buildings without hidden consequences. But knowing that people like Barrett continue to harm others without facing any repercussions, could I stand by? I'm not sure. Painful as it was, his honesty meant something. What I wanted to hear, he wasn't trying to tell me. For being truthful, thank you, I said. To think, I need more time. Of course. Toward the door, James moved, then paused. For what it's worth, good at this I think you would be. Because you're cruel or vengeful, not, but because you're thoughtful. To our judgments, balance you would bring. Our motives, question. From our principles, ensure we don't stray. A sad smile he gave me. But whatever you decide, I'll respect. After he left, in the archive room I remained for hours, reviewing more cases, examining the evolution of the Penrite methods over generations. By the time I emerged, fallen had night, and quiet was Thornfield. In the south wing, I found Walter, sitting by a window overlooking the gardens, a book open in his lap. As I entered, he looked up, those shrewd eyes taking my measure. A decision, have you reached? He asked. Not yet, but questions I have only you can answer. To the chair across from him, Walter gestured. Ask. Down, I sat, choosing my words carefully. By Penrite justice, James told me no one has ever been seriously harmed. True, is that? Physically harmed? Yes, true that's. Bodily injury or death, meant to cause consequences we've never designed. Steady was Walter's voice. Financially ruined, psychologically distressed? Yes, those have happened, but only to those who inflicted similar or worse fates on others. And the family truly believes this is justified, that you have the right to decide these matters. Unflinching was Walter's gaze. Any special right, we don't claim. We simply refuse to accept that might makes right, that those with power can harm others without consequence. Slightly, he leaned forward. Consider this. When conventional justice fails, when courts are corrupted, when money buys immunity, when victims have no recourse, what options remain? Except that the powerful are above accountability, or alternative means to restore balance, find. His words, I considered. But who watches the watchers? Who ensures the Penrights don't abuse this power? Each other, we watch, Walter replied. By multiple family members, every consequence must be approved. Evidence must be presented. Proportionality debated. Than we've accepted over the years, more cases we've rejected. Faintly, he smiled. And now perhaps us, you will watch as well. Valuable would be your perspective. In ways the rest of us sometimes forget to, you question. That I might join them, his assumption irritated me. That decision, I haven't made. No, but considering it you are. Otherwise, asking these questions, here you wouldn't be. His book, Walter closed. You know, both passion and restraint. Edwin believed true justice required the drive to right wrongs, but the discipline to do so proportionally. Too far in one direction or the other, the Penrights have sometimes tilted. That balance, new perspectives help restore. Needing to end the conversation before his words could sway me further, I stood up. Good night, Walter. Good night, Eleanor. Whatever you decide, remember this. About consequences only, the Penright legacy isn't. About standing for those who cannot stand for themselves when all other options have failed them, it's. Back to the East Wing, his words followed me where I spent another restless night weighing impossible choices. In the morning, I called James and asked him to meet me in the gardens. On a stone bench beside a reflecting pool, he found me, the summer flowers in full bloom around us. My decision, I've made, I said as he sat beside me. James nodded, his expression carefully neutral, though the tension in his shoulders I could see. I can't fully embrace the Penright legacy, I began. The idea of appointing ourselves judges, it still troubles me deeply, but I also can't ignore the reality that conventional justice often fails, that the powerful do escape accountability for serious harms. To face him directly, I turned. So, my proposal is here's. With you, I'll remain, with the family. I won't leave or expose your activities, but oversight I want, real oversight of the Penright justice system. Frowned, James. What do you mean? Over cases, veto power I want. If I believe someone doesn't deserve your brand of consequences, or if the proposed response seems disproportionate, that case you all agree to abandon. No exceptions. The family's conscience, you want to be, James said slowly. Someone needs to be. From what I've seen in the archives, sometimes strayed from their principles have the Penrights, targeted people for personal slights, designed consequences driven more by anger than justice. His gaze, I held. If part of this family I'm going to be, I need to know there are checks and balances, real ones. For a long moment, James was quiet, considering. The others won't like it, particularly the older generation. Then from the family I walk away, from Thornfield, from you. To say, the words hurt, but I meant them. My condition, this is. Take it or leave it, James. With them, I'll need to discuss it, he said finally. But for your position, I'll advocate. Right, I think you are. To question our judgments, to ensure we don't become what we claim to stand against, someone we do need. 2 days later, for what felt like a formal hearing, the entire Penright family gathered in the dining room. Richard, Sylvia, Edward, Marianne, Walter, Cecilia, and James, all watching me as I presented my case. My concerns about their self-appointed authority, the potential for bias in their judgments, the lack of true accountability in their system, I laid out. your legacy, I'm not asking you to abandon, I concluded. By adding a layer of oversight, a check against vengeance masquerading as justice, I'm asking you to strengthen it. First, Walter spoke. And if we refuse your terms? Then today, I leave. And while I wouldn't expose your activities, this family, I'm not interested in destroying, for your purposes, my own work is never used, I would ensure. Forward, Richard leaned, his expression thoughtful. And if we agree, what assurance do we have that you won't simply veto every case out of principle? None. On its merits, I'll judge each case, my word accept. To consequences for those who truly deserve them, I'm not opposed. About who deserves what, I'm opposed to unilateral decisions. Steadily, I met his gaze. As you must trust my judgment, I must trust yours. The nature of checks and balances, that's. Hours, the debate lasted. The most resistant were Edward and Richard, arguing that a system that had functioned effectively for generations would be undermined by introducing a potential veto. Surprisingly, my strongest advocate became Walter. Approved would have Edwin, he said at one point. That future generations might lose sight of the true purpose behind his work, he always feared. Justice, not revenge. Against that drift, a safeguard Eleanor offers us. In the end, to my terms they agreed with one condition of their own. Veto power I would have, but before rendering judgment, I would also be required to fully understand each case. Without reviewing all evidence and hearing all arguments, no summary dismissals. Reasonable, that's, I conceded. Out of hand, I don't want to reject cases. They truly meet the standards you claim to uphold, I want to ensure. And so not just a Penrite by marriage I became, but a new kind of Penrite, one who stood slightly apart from the family legacy while simultaneously becoming central to it. The conscience of a century-old system of architectural justice. Over the next year, out of 23 brought before the family, I vetoed 7 cases. Some because the evidence of wrongdoing wasn't conclusive enough, others because the proposed consequences seemed disproportionate to the offense. My judgment was respected in each instance, though not without debate. 16 cases I also approved, situations where the evidence of serious harm was clear, where conventional justice had demonstrably failed, and where the designed consequences seemed truly proportional. To some of those designs, I even contributed, finding ways to make them more precisely targeted, less likely to affect innocent bystanders. A nursing home owner who had systematically neglected residents while falsifying records to maintain his license and government funding involved my first approved case. Multiple complaints had been filed, inspections conducted, yet he remained in business, his political connections shielding him from meaningful consequences. When he hired the Penrite Group to design his new vacation home, I approved subtle modifications to the heating and cooling systems. Nothing that would cause physical harm, but adjustments that would make the property perpetually uncomfortable, requiring constant maintenance and expense. A fitting echo of the discomfort he had inflicted on vulnerable residents in his care. Slowly, James and I rebuilt our relationship. The deception that had nearly torn us apart became, paradoxically, the foundation for a more honest partnership. Frequently, we argued about cases, challenging each other's assumptions and judgments. But rather than weaken our bond, those arguments strengthened, forcing us to articulate our values and find common ground. 6 months after my confrontation with the family, I discovered I was pregnant. Both joy and renewed questions about the legacy our child would inherit, the news brought. To continue the Penrite tradition, would we raise them, or from knowledge of it, shield them until they were old enough to make their own choice? At length, James and I discussed this, eventually agreeing that the same option Sylvia had taken would be given to our child, to know only what was necessary until they were old enough to decide for themselves whether to embrace the full legacy. 3 months before our daughter was born, Walter died peacefully in his sleep. His journals he left me, decades of reflections on the nature of justice, the proper use of the Penrite methods, the moral questions he had wrestled with throughout his life. Dated just a week before his death, his final entry mentioned me. Asterisk balance to the family, Eleanor brings. Our motives to examine, to remember why Edwin began this work, not for vengeance but for justice, not to punish but to restore balance, her questions force us. For her skepticism, her insistence on proof and proportion, the Penrite legacy is stronger. As he intended, confident I go to my rest that what Edwin built will continue, neither devolving into mere revenge nor growing too timid to act when action is needed. After Edwin's wife, the woman whose death had catalyzed the Penrite legacy, we named our daughter Margaret. As I hold her, watching her sleep in the nursery we prepared in the East Wing, I often wonder what she will choose when the time comes. As James has, will she embrace the family legacy, reject it entirely, or as I have, find her own middle path? Whatever she decides, I'm determined that it will be a true choice, one made with full knowledge and free will, not obligation or deception. And until that day comes, as the conscience of the Penrites, I'll continue my role, ensuring that what began as one man's quest for justice doesn't become merely an excuse for revenge. Because that's the thing about revenge. Easy to justify, easy to disguise as justice. Thin is the line between the two, constantly shifting. For over a century, that line have the Penrites walked, sometimes straying to one side or the other. To help them stay on the right side, my job is to ensure that their quiet, patient consequences remain proportional, targeted, and truly deserved. By joining this family enterprise, I've compromised my principles, some might say. Perhaps I have, but I prefer to think I've found a way to temper it, to guide it closer to the justice it claims to serve. In a world where the powerful too often escape accountability, perhaps a place for the Penrites there is after all, so long as someone stands ready to question their judgments, to demand evidence and proportion, to say enough when necessary. Before I met the Penrites, I never thought much about revenge. Now every day, I think about the difference between revenge and justice, and I hope that difference matters. Not just to me, but to everyone touched by the century of quiet consequences the Penrite family has built into the world around them.